As we are now into MLS Cup week, and we are just a couple of days away from the big game and find out who exactly is going to win MLS Cup this season, I think it's time to do a video where we're going to be talking about one of the biggest talking points coming into this game, and quite frankly, the biggest talking point throughout the season is that should this year MLS Cup winner get an asterisk. And there's no doubt that this season has been an absolute extraordinary season in MLS, and probably a season that we will never forget for a very long time because of the circumstances and the fact that no one predicted that we would be having a global pandemic this year, and that somehow MLS would still be playing during a global pandemic. And that definitely has bring a lot of discussion with how crazy things have gone this season. Should the MLS Cup winners still legitimately say that they, of course, won this season, or is there supposed to be an asterisk to put in their name? And what I'm going to do in this video is that I'm going to kind of look at both sides of the argument, and I'm going to pretty much give why I think this year MLS Cup winner should get an asterisk and why this year's MLS Cup winner should not get an asterisk. And there are some good points that could be made in terms of both sides. Now, in the should part of the fact that this year MLS Cup winner should get an asterisk next to the name, the first reason is pretty obvious. This season is just incredibly extraordinary, and in some ways it was kind of disruptive of how this season has played out. I mean, this year we had like 4 periods of times where there was a stop and go situation where just 2 games into the regular season, the season was suspended for about 3 months because of the global pandemic. And by the time that the league restarted, they of course were played in the MLS's back tournament, which, you know, there's never in the league history where we ever see in the middle of the season all the team will be going down to a neutral site, or in this case Orlando, to play a tournament like that. And then for some of those teams that got eliminated early in the tournament, they had to wait another month in terms of getting to phase 1 of the schedule. And even then, there were also times during when games were at home markets that some teams also had to go through a stop and go situation, and especially from what we saw with the Colorado Rapids, where they had a COVID outbreak that was going on during the time when the games were at home market, and they also had a month of layoff. It's just incredibly crazy of how things actually went on, and that, you know, if you're going to award an MLS Cup winner, you probably feel like awarding one during such a crazy thing like what we saw this season is something that is, some people might see it as not legit, and that maybe that is kind of the reason why people think that there should be an asterisk. Because, you know, when you look at past MLS Cup winner, there was never one that has to deal with so many of these extraordinary and crazy kind of things like that. And that this year, because of it and how some teams might even took advantage of some of the most extraordinary thing that happened in this year, maybe that is one of the biggest reasons why they should get an asterisk in terms of that name. Now, the other reason why this year MLS Cup winner should get an asterisk, and this is probably even a more valid argument, the unbalanced schedule. I mean, this season, coming into this year, there was already a discussion about the unbalanced schedule, as this is going to be the first season in a very long time, and probably the first time in MLS history, where not every team is going to play every single opponent at least once. This season, because of the fact that we have 26 teams, that means that each of the team will not be playing 3 of the opponent that is currently not in the conference that they're in. But obviously that has completely thrown out of the window because of what happened in the pandemic, and it turns out what happened next was the fact that teams can only play against teams that is in their group of the MLS's back tournament, or against teams that they're going to be playing in the knockout round if they did make it to the knockout round of the MLS's back tournament. And then when games were back into home market, teams were only able to play against teams that is in their regional markets. So you don't have like these West Coast team play against an East Coast team at all like that. And in some way, you also don't see these Midwestern team play against team that is in the West Coast, and it just kind of creates a very unbalanced schedule. And that, in some sense, people will say that some teams, you know, because of the fact that their region might be filled with a a couple of weak team, or if you're kind of like a team that is contending for MLS Cup, I can definitely see why some team that are definitely contend to MLS Cup is going to be angry the fact that they have to be facing teams in their region that are also kind of contending for MLS Cup, and that they will argue that the other some other teams that are contending for MLS Cup and contend to make the playoffs get so many of these easy opponent, and that they easily got themselves into the playoffs and potentially MLS Cup because of this cupcake schedule that they of course play. And since I mentioned that, that of course gets to the next point where a lot of people were definitely not happy about the situation when Canadian team had to play against each other for almost a quarter of the season, and definitely a lot of people were not happy about TFC in terms of this, because Toronto, they were basically playing Vancouver and Montreal 6 times this season, and back then both of those teams were definitely not good at all. Now, sure, yes, Vancouver and Montreal did beat TFC once during that time, but imagine if TFC did win the Supporter Shield this year. There's going to be a lot of people that's going to say, well, yeah, it's great that they won the Supporter Shield, but remember how they spent a quarter of that season playing against cupcake Canadian team like Vancouver and Montreal every single day. So yeah, maybe that should be also kind of an asterisk in terms of them winning Supporter Shield. And heck, if they even got to the MLS Cup, there's going to be people saying that maybe there's an asterisk of the fact that, they were able to be benefit of the doubt of getting a good record because they're playing so many cupcake games, and that they basically had home field advantage throughout the entire playoffs. Now, speaking of the playoffs, the fourth reason I think people will say the MLS Cup winner will get an asterisk is the expanded playoffs. And I know if New England did make it to MLS Cup, and let's say if they did beat Columbus, they would definitely become the first 8 seed to make it to MLS Cup. And that under normal circumstances, there's no team that is an 8 seed to ever reach MLS Cup. But quite frankly, there's never an 8 seed that actually made it to the playoffs because of the fact that each of the conference before this season, when the playoffs are expanded, the maximum amount of team was only 17 there. So the expanded playoffs, well, it did kind of give opportunity for a lot of these teams to potentially make it to the playoffs and have a chance to compete for MLS Cup. This also created some problem with the way that some of those teams that are kind of like near the lower C of the team, yeah, they probably did not belong into the playoffs, and in past years they would probably nowhere near in terms of making the playoffs. I mean, I look at the Eastern Conference, and you look at those teams that are the 9th and 10th seed, that is Montreal and Inter Miami. They had terrible records heading into the playoffs, and heck, I'll even throw in the Quakes in this kind of conundrum too, where the Quakes, they were awful for the first part of the home market game and for phase 1 and phase 2, and that, yes, they did eventually went on a crazy run to come back to get themselves above the red line, but still, at the end of the day, you look at just how they played this season and how much of a roller coaster it is. It still doesn't mean that they of course should be belong in to the playoffs, and especially the fact that they of course finished in the 8th seed. In the past, they wouldn't made it to the playoffs, and in fact, last year the Quakes of course finished in 8th place, and they didn't make it to the playoffs this year. So it's just I can definitely see why some people will say that a MLS Cup winner can get an asterisk because of the expanded playoff. Because again, if New England did make it to the playoffs, and if they did win MLS Cup this year, people are going to say that, well, in normal circumstances, they wouldn't even make it to the playoffs in the first place, because of the fact that only 7 teams make it to the playoffs in normal circumstances, and that's usually the maximum amount of numbers of teams allowed to be in the playoffs. Now, finally, the last reason why MLS Cup winner will get an asterisk for this year is the fact that we went with a points per game system at the end of the year, and that not everyone played the same amount of game for the regular season. And not only this was there was a lot of criticism in terms of this, and we saw what happened with Colorado, of how they were the biggest beneficial to this, with them jump all the way in the plays in the Western Conference, despite the fact that they played the fewest amount of game out of anyone in the Western Conference. And heck, they kind of just sit out for a month of the season because they had a COVID outbreak that is going on, and yet they still somehow got themselves into the playoffs. Obviously, a lot of people are kind of angry the fact that they didn't have to suffer the tear and wear as what many team has to deal with. But that being said, I think the other legitimate reason why this could be a reason why this year MLS Cup winner could get an asterisk has actually something to do with the hosting scenario. Because, Columbus are going to be hosting MLS Cup this year against the Seattle Sounders. They actually just barely got enough points in the points per game system to be able to host MLS Cup against the Seattle Sounders. They actually, I believe, got a 1.87 points per game compared to the Seattle Sounders that got a 1.86 points per game total. And keep in mind, the Sounders and the Crew, the Sounders actually play one fewer game than the Columbus Crew has played. And if that game advantage that Seattle has, and that if they would have played the same amount of game and that Sounders would have won that game advantage and they would play even amount of games, then maybe the Sounders would be hosting MLS Cup. And that, I know this year with home field advantage, it's not as big as it is in the past with the fact that there's no fans that is in attendance for these games. But you got to think, if the MLS Cup was host at Lumen's Field instead of at Mount Priest Stadium in Columbus, how much will we talk about the fact that there could be definitely a bigger advantage and that there's going to be momentum toward one team. I mean, if this MLS Cup was host at Lumen's Field, there's no doubt that Seattle is going to be heavy favorites, knowing the fact that they have a great history of playing at home, and in fact they have a record-breaking history of them winning 14 consecutive home playoff game in league history, while Columbus this season, they haven't won a single road game this year, and that they've been kind of, I don't want to say they've been lucky, the fact that they've reached MLS Cup, the fact that they haven't have to play a road game during this playoffs, but they're pretty fortunate that of course is the case, because we've seen this season, whenever the Crew goes on the road, they tends to really struggle compared to playing at home. But now the fact that they get to play at home against the Sounders, and still, if you look at the matchup for this MLS Cup, I still think the Sounders is the favorites coming in. But with Columbus, knowing the fact that they're playing at home and have that home field advantage, and at least Columbus is one of the few stadium in MLS where they do allow fans to attend their games, that could definitely be a bigger advantage compared to if, say, this game does go to Lumen's Field and that Seattle would host and it's all because of the fact that Columbus was the benefit of the doubt of the points per game system, and that I don't think a lot of Sounders fans realize the fact that in some way they kind of got a little bit screwed over with them. If they would have played that extra game and would have won that one, they would have been able to host MLS Cup this year for the second year in a row. Now, since I talk about why this year's MLS Cup winner should get an asterisk, let's actually now talk about why they should not get an asterisk. And again, there is some good kind of argument of why I think this year's MLS Cup winner should not get an asterisk. And probably one of the biggest reasons is that the players really risk their health and safety to play this season. I mean, I can't tell you how incredible the fact that MLS was able to pull this one off, and especially there was so many times there was a lot of uncertainty of whether or not if this season is even going to be complete. Like, never mind actually getting into this part where we are just a couple of days away from awarding the winner of this year in MLS and crowning a champion. There was a lot of uncertainty this season with the way that whether or not if MLS Cup is actually going to happen and whether this season is actually going to be happening. And I think the reason why it eventually did happen, or at least one of the reasons, is that the players, they did not complain about the fact that they know the health, that they know the risk that they have to take with the health and safety with this pandemic. And even I know there are a lot of protocol in the league that are trying their best to protect the health and safety of the players throughout this season. Still, that is, when you're playing in a pandemic, there, even with with all these protocol, there could still be a situation where these players, in terms of their health and safety, is definitely in danger throughout this season. And one of those ways that has endangered their health and safety, besides the fact that they could potentially get tested positive for COVID-19, is no doubt injuries. And that also kind of brings me to the next point, where I really think this year, with how congested the schedule is, and where pretty much every single team had to play like 3 games in 7 days every single week, there's just not enough time for these players to kind of recover, and that player fitness was really tested on the brinks this season, and that it also is no surprise the fact that we had a lot of injuries during this shortened season, because you just cannot have these players play pretty much 3 games in 7 days and have to play a weekend and then a midweek game literally in a span of 3 days every single week, and not expect the fact that there's going to be some injuries and some wear and tear that is going to be happening this year. So yeah, definitely I got to give a lot of props in terms of the fact that these players, this is probably the toughest year that they have to endure, knowing the fact that even in a shortened season, with them playing so many games in such a short amount of time and really risking themselves potentially suffering injury because of the fact that they don't have enough time to recover because of the congested schedule. That is kind of also a reason why I don't think this year MLS Cup winner should get an asterisk, and that in many ways they work probably even harder than previous MLS Cup winner to even get into the playoffs or get into the stage where they could potentially win MLS Cup this season. Now, the third thing why I think MLS Cup winners should not get an asterisk is kind of similar to what I said about how teams really face injuries, COVID outbreak, and postponement as some of the adversity. I mean, if you are a head coach of this season, I mean, I gotta say they really deserve props in terms of what they have done this season, and even for some of those head coaches that haven't done very well for their team this season and had a bad season. I think people forget that a lot of these head coaches are facing a lot of head scratching and just kind of madness kind of moment, knowing the fact that they are really concerned of whether or not if there is injuries that they have to deal with, and kind of had to rotate the squad pretty much every single game. And also the uncertainty of the fact that what if all of a sudden you're going to get a phone call and hearing that one of your player got tested positive for COVID-19, or worse, that player that got tested with COVID-19 also mean that he is going to be in contact with other players, and therefore you're basically going to get a COVID outbreak that is happening on your team, and that you're not be able to play these games. And speaking of not able to play these games, postponement is also another thing that I think a lot of these teams had faced adversity. And I know fans usually, when they see teams get their game postponed, some fans would be happy the fact that they of course get more rest for their very next game. Well, yes, they of course will get rest for their very next game when there's a postponement that has happened, but that also doesn't mean that game is going to not make up for, and that these postponement, as we find out later in the season, because of the fact that the league decided to go with a points per game system, we saw how these postponement can really cause headache for a lot of these teams, and that sometimes with them not being able to make up those games could really kind of hurt them in terms of them either making the playoffs or how the seeding, of course, worked in the playoffs. But the other thing I will also say about postponement is that also kind of creates a lot of headache for coaches, that they've been kind of prepared to how to or prepare all the tactics and all the strategy, of course, to able to get all 3 points against a team, and then all of a sudden the game got postponed either days or just hours leading to kickoff, and that has to be frustrated too, because of all that preparation basically means absolutely nothing, because the game is now being postponed or not being played at all this regular season. Now, the fourth thing that I think this year's MLS Cup winners should get an asterisk is that some teams had to stay in hotels for months and play home games at neutral ground. That, of course, has to apply with all these Canadian teams, where I think these Canadian teams, it's kind of extraordinary the fact that they were able to continue the regular season and playing at neutral ground. And you know how uncomfortable that has to be with some of these Canadian teams, knowing the fact that they're going to be staying in a hotel every single night and also training in a city that they are not based in and have to play their home game in virtually a neutral ground, and that also aren't able to see their families throughout that time too. And this is kind of also the case during the MLS's back tournament too, where not only it's some teams that had to stay in a hotel for months and play home games at neutral ground. That's pretty much almost every single team in the MLS's back tournament, besides Dallas and Nashville, who got kicked out of the MLS's back tournament, where all these players had to stay in a hotel in Orlando, and that for some of these teams that were in this tournament for a very long time because they made a deep run heading into this tournament, they basically had to keep playing games at a neutral ground, and actually not even a neutral ground, but more like a soccer complex that was at the Disney Wide World of Sports complex. And during those times, that not only they're staying at a hotel for a couple of weeks, but they also aren't able to see their family member or even visit their family member or even go out of the hotel because of the fact that all these teams are in a bubble like that. So yeah, because of how much adversity that some of these teams and pretty much all these teams in the MLS's back tournament has to deal with, I think it isn't hard to say that one of those teams that eventually will win MLS Cup this year, and both of these teams that made it to MLS Cup were part of the MLS's back tournament bubble. You know, they definitely get the recognition and should not get an asterisk that they won MLS Cup, because they also had to deal with such a painful and just kind of stressful situation of being in a bubble and unable to really go anywhere because of that. And then the final reason why I think this year's MLS Cup winner should not get an asterisk is the fact that the road to MLS Cup via the playoffs is pretty much the same as last season. I mean, even though I know this year the playoffs was expanded, it's still pretty much the same, where for most teams, they have to win 3 games if they are going to be reach MLS Cup. And just like last year, it was single elimination. So yeah, there's really no difference of how they can get to MLS Cup. I mean, the regular season, yes, there was a lot of difference of how they get into the playoffs, but when playoffs starts, it's pretty much the same thing, at least for the Western Conference, where pretty much every single team have to play three games to get to MLS Cup. And in the Eastern Conference, besides 2 other teams that has to play a play-in game, it's still pretty much the same, where once the playoffs first round started, you need to, of course, win 3 of those games if you're going to potentially reach MLS Cup. So yeah, I think that of how crazy this season has gone, I think many people forgot that the playoffs structure was pretty much similar, with some minor kind of changes with the expanded playoffs, but other than how you reach MLS Cup, it's pretty much the same as we have seen from last season and previous year. But there you have it. That is pretty much some of the argument that I think people, and myself included, that I could make in terms of why this year MLS Cup winner should get an asterisk and why this year MLS Cup winner should not get an asterisk. And let me know in the comments below which side you actually stood against. I mean, I really don't have a side to pick on, besides the fact that I think I'm kind of like in the middle, where I can definitely see why this year whoever wins MLS Cup is going to get an asterisk, but at the same time, there's also some reason why that is not going to be the case. But let me know in the comments below, do you think this year's MLS Cup winner should get an asterisk? And yeah, hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I will see you guys next time.